Star Trek books. They've been around for decades. Join us, the Trek ladies, Kavura and Jen, as we discuss the novels one at a time. Welcome to the Ladies Trek Library. Hello, so we are back with Ladies Trek Library, and this is Kavura, and I'm here with Jen. Hello, Jen.
Hi, Kavura. Great to be back.
Yes, and so this time our book is Doctor's Orders by Diane Duane, one of my favorite writers. Okay, Jen, do you want to read us the summary of this book?
Sure. So the back of the book is, when Dr. McCoy grumbles once too often about the way the Enterprise ought to be run, Captain Kirk decides to leave the Doctor in command while he oversees a routine diplomatic mission. Kirk beams down to a strange planet nicknamed Flyspeck to negotiate its admission into the Federation, leaving Dr. McCoy to enjoy his new authority. However, the Doctor soon learns that command is a double-edged sword when Kirk disappears without a trace. Desperately trying to locate his captain, McCoy comes under pressure from Starfleet to resolve the situation immediately. Matters go from bad to worse when the Klingons arrive and stake their own claim on Flyspeck. Then another more deadly power threatens them all, and suddenly, Dr. McCoy and the Enterprise find themselves pitted against an alien fleet in a battle they have no hope of winning.
Okay, that was interesting. Yeah, because when I started reading the book, I didn't realize it was going to have Klingons.
I didn't either. I just thought there's no, the cover is just Spock and McCoy and the Enterprise, so no hint of Klingons in that.
So it was called Doctor's Orders. And so when McCoy was put in command, so how was his command style?
Well, so McCoy is reluctantly put into command, and at first he's a very reluctant commander. He doesn't want to be there. He'd rather be back in sickbay doing his job. But he actually learned a bit from Kirk, and he read some of the command, I guess, manuals that Kirk had left him. And, he takes his job seriously, and he turns out that he is a pretty good leader, even if he doesn't want to be.
Right. Now, I think they said that he did have some command training. He's not on the command track, but he was qualified enough that Kirk could leave him in command. And of course Kirk didn't know that all of this would happen, that he would disappear and all this other stuff. But
yeah, for sure. I would just say it's very clear throughout though that McCoy doesn't want to be in command because he's very nervous about the whole thing.
Right. And so the Klingons show up, and I thought it was really neat that, he did handle the Klingons pretty well. I thought it was neat how he was acting so polite to them. It was sort of like I could hear him talking in my mind. It was like all this Southern charm. Well, sure, you can beam down to the planet, and if you need any help from us, don't hesitate to ask. It was hilarious, but it was great, and it worked for the Klingons. They were like, they were surprised. You're not going to give us a fight about this?
Yeah, it was interesting too. When he kind of realized he's not going to be able to rely on his tactical knowledge the way Kirk would, because he's not as experienced in dealing with those situations. He sort of resorts to playing like he's crazy a bit, and let's see how the Klingons perceive it if I tell them that I killed Captain Kirk and I act like I'm totally loony. And I thought that was kind of a fun tactic.
And he gave orders pretty well too, and he didn't try to take advantage of it. Not that we thought he would, but it was good the way he could handle and talk to the other crew just like their people, and knew what was appropriate for them to do. I think it was actually handled pretty well. It was better than I thought he would do in command. The episode, what was it, The Deadly Years, when that Commodore took over the Enterprise, and he had no idea what to do when the Romulans showed up.
Yeah.
So McCoy handled it a lot better than that.
Yeah, he did. And it'd be interesting if they had ever, I don't recall ever seeing I don't think there was an original series episode where McCoy was in command even for like a short period of time. There might have been an episode where he maybe sat in the captain's chair briefly, like when Kirk stepped off the bridge, but
Yeah.
it would have been neat to see an episode where he was in command for a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I don't think there was. The only thing I could compare it to would be like when Dr. Crusher was put in command, but she actually had command training.
Yeah. And there was a Deanna Troy that was there an episode, but she also had some command training. So
Yes, and since McCoy wasn't on that track, I mean, he was just used to commanding his own department that he was in charge of. So he did have leadership skills, of course, but it's just different sitting on the bridge. So what do we think about how the author handled, not just McCoy being in command, but all of the other characters in this book?
well, I wasn't disappointed in that. I mean, Diane Duane is one of my favorite authors. She's a great Star Trek writer, and every book that I've read of her, she really gets the characters, and I thought she did in this one too.
Yeah, Diane Duane is also one of my favorite writers because I mean, mostly I've always liked how she developed the Vulcans and the Romulans in her other books. And it is interesting that she did have one of her Romulan books, The Romulan Way, where she focused on McCoy a lot when McCoy went to Romulus. So I think, well, like he is one of her favorite characters, right?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that when I started reading this book and I realized it was all about McCoy and that Diane Duane had written it, and I've read The Romulan Way, which is McCoy is the central character in that, I would say, at least more than Kirk and Spock. Then I was like, oh, I guess she must like McCoy. She's given him a lot of time in her books.
Yes, and so the way I mean, I like how Spock represented being under McCoy's command, and Spock handled it well too. I mean, he didn't try to be flip about it, even though, I mean, he knew McCoy's experience, but because these two, I mean, even though they argue a lot, they still respect each other. So Spock still reflected the chain of command very well.
Yeah, uh, as we would expect, being a Vulcan, and it was on that point, it was a little bit of a plot device where, Kirk leaves McCoy in command, thinking it's just going to be, him sitting there not really doing much as the ship orbits the planet. Of course, he doesn't expect that he's going to go missing and that the Klingons are going to show up and that McCoy will be left in charge of all this. Um, but as a plot device, sort of when all the situation happens, McCoy, he wants to hand over command to Spock since he's more experienced and he's been in command before. And Spock says, "Oh no, you can't do that. Starfleet protocol is that only the person who puts you in charge can relieve you of charge. So, I could be court-martialed." I think he says if I take over, which is kind of a little bit of a stretch.
That's what I
But
thought too.
you'd think Starfleet, in this situation occurring with the Klingons, that Starfleet would want the person to be in charge who has the most experience. But I guess she had to figure out some way to keep McCoy in charge. So I guess I could forgive her for that.
Yeah, she wanted to write a book about McCoy being in charge, and I guess we are supposed to kind of like we're supposed to overlook that. Yeah, it was a plot device, but just go with it because it was still a good story about McCoy being in charge.
Yeah.
One of the things, like because you're reading the book, it's called Doctor's Orders. You know that McCoy is going to be put in command, but it actually took a while before they actually got to the part where Kirk left him in command.
Yeah, and that was my major the reason that I wouldn't like highly rate this book. I mean, I think Diane Duane's writing is excellent, and I love seeing McCoy in charge. But for me, the issue I had with the book was that the pace was so slow that I just felt like I was forcing myself to keep going on, and the action really doesn't start to happen until pretty far into the book. So it was quite a while before we even get to the point where McCoy is put in charge. And then, once he is in charge, there's, and we're dealing with the battle with the Klingons, then we have this, what to me felt like an extremely protracted battle scenes that just kept going on, page after page. And I was like, oh, I just can't, like, I had to force myself to finish. I think it would have worked out well on screen where you're watching a battle happen. That's always exciting. But trying to read about it, at least for me, it just felt like it was too slow paced. And that's my only, thing that I would fault with the book.
I kind of, I agree with you. The battle scenes at the end, they did seem to go a little too long. The rest of the book, the pacing, I didn't really mind. Yeah, I was waiting for, okay, like when does McCoy take command? Yeah, there is that anticipation there, but I didn't find that too bad. I was actually enjoying it, all the talk with the three alien races. And that was very interesting. That was something that was very original, I thought. That the three different races that were completely different on this planet. And now that I think about it, they never did explain, because they said, like, how could the planet have three races that evolved so differently? And they never did explain that in this book.
No, they didn't. And I agree with you. I enjoyed the scenes where it is Kirk on the planet, and there was a scene before that with McCoy on the planet talking to the aliens. And we have these three alien species on this planet, which are one of them is spelled with a semicolon AT, which I'm just going to say is the at, but I think in the book they said it's pronounced like at. With like
Yes.
who are like these mysterious, they sort of look like stone, but they, they don't exist all in the same place at the same time. They have sort of the ability to be in different periods of time at once. And then we have the Orne, who are these, I don't know how you describe them. They seem like happy. They kind of reminded me of Smurfs, even though they're not blue or elves or anything, but they just seem like this happy little, and they're kind of like translucent. And those were the ones that they could talk with the most. And then there was the Lahit. I don't know how I'm pronouncing any of these correctly, who were the kind of reminded me of Ents from Lord of the Rings, these tree-like beings.
Yes.
And then they were all really original. So I especially enjoyed when Captain Kirk and McCoy interact with the aliens, and Captain Kirk is talking with the one at who he names the master. And that was really interesting, sort of learning about these aliens.
I did read that she created these aliens for a Star Trek game, but before she wrote this book, so she was, reusing something, but that it's still interesting though to read about these. And yeah, the pronunciations, I kind of like that it's a book, and so she takes advantage of this, like, well, how do you pronounce it? And so when you're just reading it, so you don't really know, you don't get to hear someone say it unless you were doing the audible. I don't know if they made an audible of this, but yeah, the at, or I called him the at too, but it must be some little click and then at. And the Orne, I sort of pictured them being like little bags filled with water that just sort of roll around. That's kind of how I pictured them. And I think they're kind of cute because their dialogue seemed to be kind of cute and childlike. And so now this book actually came out in 1990, so it's when TNG was fairly new because the Next Generation started in '87. Deep Space Nine had not come on yet, but I kind of think that the reminded me of the wormhole aliens on Deep Space Nine. Did you get that?
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
You know what? And I didn't even think about that until you said it now. They differed from the wormhole aliens in that the wormhole aliens always presented themselves to Cisco or whoever was seeing them as people that Cisco knew.
Yes.
And the ad did not do that to Kirk. They were just there as themselves. But they did they existed in a universe or realm that's so different from what we live in that whatever they said really didn't make sense, and it was like trying, listening to them or talking with them was kind of like talking to a riddle. Like you really couldn't understand what they meant.
Yes, and there was a lot in the book about language because they were trying to configure the universal translator to interpret the language of all three of these aliens, and so they did say about the they about using the tenses, and maybe we're not translating that correctly. It almost seems like this could have been more of an Uhura book too, because they talked so much about translating the language.
Yeah, they did, and I actually thought that would be a good story with Uhura trying to help with the language. And she did have there were some parts in here where she, was in here working with her universal translator, her and some of the other crew members who were, I guess, communications crew members.
Yeah, she was there. It's just she didn't really get as much use. I think the person we didn't see as much of in this book was Scotty. He just had a few lines from engineering. I mean, he was the main character that was used the least in this.
Yeah,
but I guess
he was barely in it.
You have to focus on someone though. And I have to say I do like at the beginning with Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, all of their banter was really good. I mean, I think Diane Duane does good at handling character moments and having them all act as they should, as perfectly in character for them.
Yeah, she does. That's one of her strengths. I think she always does a really good job with the characters. And she included some of characters in this book that some familiar characters that people who read the novels would know, although these were not TV characters. So like the Harb Tanzer, the guy who runs the rec room, he's a frequently appearing character in the novels. And Security Chief Ingrid Thompson is in there as well.
I did notice that. Yeah, because she likes to reuse those characters. But the thing is, so I read that she was really not allowed to to use any characters that were just created from the novels. I mean, I think she was able to sneak in a few things because the people that were editing just didn't notice. But like Harb Tanzer didn't really have a line; he was just mentioned in it one time, which is interesting. But I mean, but she didn't use Narat, the Horta that she likes to use in her books.
Oh, so you read that they said for this book she couldn't reuse any of those characters, huh?
Yeah. Well, not just her, but I mean, it was at a time period when none of the Star Trek novelists were allowed to do that. They finally, lifted that at some point. But yeah, I think that's the reason she didn't use Narat, because that would have been too obvious that she's using one of her characters.
Oh, I did not realize that. It's interesting to know that.
So, and then other highlights or anything else?
No, I mean, I just think for me the highlight was probably just the conversation that Kirk was having with the At, and then also there was a scene where the Klingons have a conversation with the At, and so it was kind of in a way like just like you said with the wormhole aliens, when you watch those episodes and you're like, well, what do they really mean? What are they trying to say? So it makes you want to figure it out. And then one thing that I really enjoyed about, this happening with the Klingons is, the Enterprise wants to know, why did the Klingons show up here? Like, what is in it for them? Do they want to, is there some valuable resource on this planet? And they couldn't really find a valuable resource and didn't really understand why the Klingons were so interested in this particular planet. And it turns out that there's some sort of plant growing there that they use in a condiment. I guess like the way that, the Cardassians have their Yarmuk sauce.
Yeah.
So that kind of made me laugh, that the whole big deal was just so they could get down to the planet and harvest some of this plant to make their condiment.
That was funny, yeah. And also because the whole tone of the book does sound like it's kind of meant for younger audiences. I mean, which does not take away from the enjoyment at all, but it is kind of, they did kind of make it, a younger, not as a mature book. So yeah, so you have the little, like the thing the Klingons were after was not really as much pertaining to battle or weapons or anything. It was just, it was a food.
Yeah.
And And the Orions were in this too, and I mean, I at least like that they had something going on where so that the Klingons and the Enterprise actually had to work together to defeat the Orions, which was a neat little twist too.
Yeah, it was a neat twist to see McCoy, who had up until that point uh, kind of been pretending to be crazy to the Klingon captain, and then having to work with him so that they could escape the Ryans together.
Yeah, a lot of these books like to use the Orions for the villains, which is good because they haven't been used as much, except maybe on Enterprise. So it was nice to see them again.
Yeah, this story felt to me very much like it could be an original series episode. You have the Klingons, the Orions, you have a planet with some very interesting aliens. So it all had that feel of original series to me.
Now, there was one little sentence where they said that the Klingons had bumpy foreheads. So they're trying to imply it's more like like starting with the motion picture Klingons and forward, even though I think it would have taken place during the original 5-year mission before we saw those type of Klingons. But that was one line in the book that I noticed.
I did not notice that line, so I'm surprised I missed it, but good catch.
And I, just have to mention there was a female Klingon who was in charge of her group. She wasn't in command of the ship, but she was in charge of the group that went down to the planet. And I think that is just something that Diane Duane, as a female writer, had to put in, which I liked, having a female in command, a Klingon, because we don't see that as much as the Klingons.
No, that's a good point. The Klingon landing party, the head of the Klingon landing party was a woman. And in the original series, we didn't really, did we even see, I don't think we saw any female Klingons in charge at all. And even in the Next Generation, it wasn't, it was more men, although I think there were some women then. So yeah, you could.
Yeah, it's very male dominated, yeah, except for, like the Duras sisters, who just sort of usurped control.
Yeah, because you remember the whole episode on Deep Space Nine where Quark has to, he marries a Klingon woman to help her maintain control of her house because they want to take the house away from her because she's a woman. So even at that point in the future, Klingon women are still, still don't have equality with the men. So yeah, it was good to see that Diane Duane had put this female Klingon in charge. She was an interesting character.
Yes, she was, and she had her whole story in there too as well, which was great. So anything else, overall thoughts about the book?
Well, my overall thoughts are, I think on Goodreads, I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. I thought it was a good book. I don't think Diane Duane, I've never read any book of hers that I think she's incapable of being a bad writer. Her writing is always good. But I kind of judge books on, do they motivate me enough that I want to just sit down and read them straight through? And this one really was one that just the slow pacing and the really long battle scene that just kept going on and on forever, and descriptions of the ship turning this way and that way, and I really had a hard time getting through it. So I wouldn't say that it's up there with my favorites, but a good book to read if you're a fan of Dr. McCoy, or just an original series fan, and you like to read books that can be an episode, that it feels like just like an episode of the show.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. I mean, well, I might give it a higher rating, maybe 4 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed it, and yeah, the part at the end about the battle with the ships was kind of slow. I guess she's not as good at writing those kind of scenes. But the whole thing was, I thought it was a good story. It was very original with the aliens that she came up with, and the way she handled McCoy being in command, and the way he talked to the Klingons. I mean, all of that really made it a fun read. And so if you're really familiar with it and want to read an original series novel. This is a good one. I think maybe it's a little simplistic. So this one is one like you could just sit down and read in a day, and it's just its own story. It's not like the ones that are later on that are connected to so many other things. But overall, it was good.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, some people really like. I don't want to even say that Diane Duane didn't write those scenes as well. She probably did write them well. Maybe that's just not like what I like to read when I read Star Trek novels. Just battle scenes to me just aren't. That's just not my thing. But some people really like that. So if that's something someone enjoys, then it's probably a good book to read for them too.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the Force be with you. Nanu Nanu.